We are jumping into a brand new chapter, Chapter 8, Understanding Fractions. We're looking at a Common Core standard, new one for this chapter, developing understanding of fractions as numbers. Understanding a fraction 1 over b is the quantity formed by one part when a whole is partitioned into b equal parts. This word here is all about fractions. You cannot have a fraction if they are not equal. We're going to use those to understand a fraction AB as the quantity formed by A parts of size 1 over B. So kind of confusing, but by the end of the chapter you will be able to understand all of these words, but the main thing to remember is equal, and we've learned that in previous years also. Lots and lots and lots of new vocabulary in this chapter that we haven't talked about in Go Math yet. In the beginning we're going to talk about eighths, equal parts, fourths, halves, sixths, thirds, and wholes. So they're kind of even just fun to say. We're going to start the chapter by the Understanding Fractions page. In your big Go Math book, you should be on page 305. Go ahead and put your name on the top. This is checking for understanding of important skills. This is going to kind of tell you where we need to be looking at moving forward and just kind of get your brain warmed up for this unit. And you'll notice again, like I said, the important fraction word is equal. Okay, so the first part is equal parts. It wants you to circle the shape that has equal parts. So these two are for number 1, these 3 are for number 2. So within both of those, they want you to circle the shape that has equal parts. So number 1, you have 2 choices. Number 3, you have 3 choices. Go ahead and circle those now, please. Okay, the next one is combine plane shapes. So we're looking at the shape pieces, and if you need some of those in order to figure some of these out, feel free to use those. You can also use a pattern block template, and if you don't want to use the actual block, and try to figure it out. Try to do it visually. See if you can draw them in there. It wants you to write the number of triangles needed to cover the shape. Okay? So how many triangles would be in this shape? Okay? So number 3, how many triangles? Number 4, how many triangles? And number 5, how many triangles? Go ahead and draw those in or figure those out. Write the numbers on the line in front of the word triangles, please. Number 6 and 7 says count equal groups to complete. So this looks a little bit like what we just did in our division models, where we drew out circles and we counted out things. So it wants to know in number 6 how many groups, and then how many are in each group. And the same with number 7. Count the number of groups and how many are in each group. Please complete number 6 and 7. On the bottom of that page, you have a new Carmen Sandiego that has been assigned to you, so you can practice those at home or when you have some other spare time. In this Math Detective, you're going to be given a fraction and apply your knowledge of numbers of equal parts. You're going to describe your experiences with sharing items and discuss how a pizza can be shared. So how can you use the information in the problem to help you draw a picture of a pizza? And you're going to be working with fractions for this Carmen Sandiego unit. Looking at the top of the next page, you have a vocabulary builder. As I said, we're going to have lots of new vocabulary. On our last 4 chapters previous to this, we had math vocabulary, but a lot of it duplicated over between the chapters and related to each other. Now we're starting a new concept with new vocabulary. So these are very, very important. So we're going to spend just today looking at only vocabulary. So we're going to complete the bubble map by using the words check mark. If we look at our preview words, we have denominator, eighths, equal parts, fourths, fractions, fractions greater than 1, halves, numerator, sixths, thirds, unit fraction, and whole. So there's all of the words that you're going to see in this chapter. The ones we're going to use for the bubble map are only the ones with the check mark in front of them. Okay? So you see the middle of our bubble map is equal parts. That's one of our preview words. And we know what equal means. Equal means the same number. And in order for it to be a fraction, the pieces have to be equal. If the pieces are not equal within a drawing, it's not a true fraction. Okay? So as long as you can remember that, it's going to make it a whole lot easier. Okay, for our first bubble, we're going to look at eighths. Okay, and when you first look at this, it looks a little confusing, but this line here actually goes with this piece. Okay, so the line is underneath the circle that we're looking at, so that was a little bit confusing to begin with. For fractions, the first thing you want to do is you are going to count the number in all that you have in each piece. In each one of the bubble pots, you need to start by counting the numbers of pieces. So in here, we only have one piece. So we know that it is a whole piece. So that one was easy. You're going to have the whole pie if you're just not even splitting it. Let's just go ahead and work clockwise. And we're going to count our pieces. So I have 1, 2 pieces. So my denominator, which isn't one of our preview words for the bubble map, the denominator is the bottom number, the down number, and it tells you the total number of pieces. So my denominator is below my fraction bar, and it is the number of total pieces. So that one, your denominator is going to be 2. Then I'm going to say I have 1 out of 2. And another way to say 1 out of 2 is that I have half. Now we're going to make it plural and make it halves. This pie shows us halves. And I want you to go ahead and start writing the fraction beside it so that you get in the habit of defining the denominator. The denominator is down. Okay? The numerator is your number, and it's going to be on the top. Okay, let's keep working clockwise. I'm going to change colors just so that you don't have to keep looking. And we're going to just go ahead and first we're going to number them. So there are 3 pieces. So if I'm going to write a fraction with my fraction bar, my denominator, my total number of pieces is going to be 3. And then I'm going to talk about 1 out of those 3 pieces. So looking at our check-marked ones, eighths doesn't make sense. Fourths we don't have. Halves we already used. Sixths doesn't make sense. Whole we already used. Thirds goes with our number 3. So this is showing the pie cut in thirds. Okay, cross that one off for me. I'm not going to scribble over it because I'm probably going to have to use them again, so I'm going to just cross it off nicely. Okay, continuing around our circle. 1, 2, 3, 4. My denominator is going to be 4, and we're talking about 1 out of 4 of those pieces. So looking at our preview words, of course, the one that makes sense, following what we just did with thirds, the one that makes sense is fourths. This pie is showing me fourths. Going to the next one, I'm going to number it again. And your denominator is the total number of pieces, so your denominator is 6. We're talking about 1 out of the 6, which tells us that this one is talking about sixths. Now we're getting into littler pieces. My denominator is my total numbers of pieces. We're going to talk about 1 of them. So I have 1 out of 8, which is eighths. This one always messes me up with spelling because it doesn't follow the spelling rules of having 5 consonants together. Okay? So we've talked about the fraction words. I went ahead and talked to you about denominator, and we talked about the numerator. Numerator is your top number. Denominator is your total pieces, and it's your bottom number underneath your fraction bar. Equal parts, we talked about how it has to be that way for a fraction, and that was our middle here, each one of those. Fractions we practiced making. Fractions greater than 1 we did not talk about this time. We only got to the whole, so that must be something we're going to be learning together. And we didn't talk about a unit fraction. So those preview words were not included in our bubble map, but I bet that we're going to get to them. Looking at the bottom of the page, I made it a separate page so that we could see it all. So we are still on page 306. It says, read the description and write the preview word. Okay? So we're learning and understanding about our vocabulary. It is a number that names part of a whole or part of a group. So we're talking about numbers that are parts of that whole number. So if we look at the pieces of numbers, and we could talk about it going into a whole number, and we're talking about our chapter, it makes sense that this one would be fractions. Okay, a fraction is a number that names part of a whole number or part of a group. Okay, it's part of a whole. Now, through text of whether you were paying attention when I was talking on the previous slide, and if you made notes on your little yellow piece, you already have this one written down. Number 2, it is a part of the fraction above the line, which tells how many parts are being counted. So we have our fraction line. We had a number up here and our denominator down here. Do we remember what this was? It was the numerator. Okay, your numerator is always on top of the fraction bar. When we did these ones up here, remember I said we're counting, we're only looking at one out of the two. So your numerator was telling you how many you were counting. Okay, number 3. It is a part of a fraction below the line. I drew that for you too, which tells how many equal parts there are in the whole. So we got our numerator, and then our total number of pieces that we talked about as the denominator. And this one is a new one. Number 4. It is a number that names one equal part of a whole and has 1 as its numerator. And I hadn't heard about this until this actual term, until I previewed this chapter. So it's a number that names one equal part of a whole that has 1 as a numerator. So it's like the page we just did before, and that's what they're calling the unit fraction. So there is a definitely new term for us that we have not worked with before. As we're finishing up this page, I want to draw your attention to a tool that you have online to you and also in the back of your big, thick math book. It is your glossary, okay? And here are the words off of the page that we just finished. It's the preview words that we worked through. If you go to your resources, to your student library on the Think Central website that you've logged into, you see this, and it is an e-glossary. If you click on the e-glossary and go to it, you can look up any of these to help you solve any of those questions of defining your vocabulary. Okay? So if you were to look up fractions, it would tell you a number that names part of a whole or part of a group is a fraction. So as you're working through these, I know last time in the last chapter, some of you would come up and say, what is that term that meant something? I want you to get into the habit of finding those yourself and go to this e-student edition multimedia e-glossary, okay, and help you find those things. We're not going to go through part 8.1 today. Instead, I would like for you to do something a little bit different. In your math center, there's the book called Pizza Parts. And in Pizza Parts, it is a story that talks about pizza. And usually with fractions, we talk about pizzas or pies a lot. You're going to grab this book and you're going to read about how to find equal parts to write fractions. So you'll take the literature book from the Go Math Center. You're going to read through it, and if there's multiples of you, you guys can take turns and do this quietly. At the end of the book, the last page of the book, it has some questions that it wants you to answer. Think and respond. Okay, you're going to draw a couple of pizzas, and then you're going to decide how you're going to divide them and how to compare them. So you're going to do some drawing and some shading and some comparing. And then you're going to write a story about how you and two friends might order and divide a pizza into equal parts. And you're going to draw that. This is going to be your journal entry for today. Okay, so when you are ready for this piece, you will get a piece of paper for your journal, and you're going to write Pizza Parts on the top. And remember, it's a title. So it should start with capitals and have quotation marks. Then go ahead and work together to read through it if somebody else is also at the point that you are, and then answer the questions in the back. And that's going to be your journal entry for today. This intro part with the vocabulary, you may want to come back and review over and over again and use that e-glossary for these brand new terms. Chapter 8 is going to be a fun chapter.